"Grandma, look what I found." It was my 8-year-old grandson standing there, holding up a wooden box he had just discovered in his father's secret hiding spot, under the bed. My son Brian's bed. And when I opened that box, what I saw made the ground disappear beneath my feet. I froze. My hands trembled. My voice vanished. That was the moment I learned the truth about my son, my own son, and what he had been doing, what he had been planning all along. This is the story of how my 8-year-old grandson accidentally saved us, all because of an innocent game. And how I learned that the most dangerous people can be the ones closest to us, even the ones we love the most. You won't believe how this ends. But before I continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe to Vintage Revenge Stories. Let's grow this community so more people our age can know they are strong and never alone. Now, let's continue the story. It was just another Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen fixing a simple snack, while my grandson's laughter echoed through the house. Tommy loved playing hide-and-seek, and that day he seemed even more excited than usual. He darted through every room, opening doors and squeezing into the most unexpected places. Eventually he made his way upstairs and somehow ended up sliding under his father's bed. The innocence of the game shifted when I heard his voice calling out, "Grandma, there's something here." At first I thought it was just another lost toy. But when I went up and saw the look in his eyes, I knew it was different. He was holding a small wooden box, the kind with an old metal clasp. It was heavy, out of place, like it had been shoved there in a hurry. The weight of that box wasn't just in the wood or the metal. It was in the story it carried. When Tommy handed it to me, smiling like he had found buried treasure, I felt a strange shiver run through me. I still remember the soft click of the clasp, the creak of the lid, and then the silence. No jewels. No old letters. Just papers. Documents. Signatures. All neatly arranged, as if someone wanted them to be easy to read, but impossible to accept. As I flipped through the pages, a wave of nausea rose in my chest. There were contracts under other people's names, bank statements with absurd amounts of money, and a power of attorney granting full control to a woman I had never even heard of. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some misunderstanding. It was strategy. A carefully laid plan to hide my money, drain my assets, and worst of all, erase me from everything. Like I was nothing but an obstacle to be removed. It was the kind of scheme you see in movies, never imagining it could happen in your own family. It's hard to explain the kind of cold you feel in a moment like that. It's not physical, it's a chill in your soul. A crack that starts deep inside and spreads through every part of you. The person I had raised, protected, and defended was building my downfall. And not out of need but out of greed. I was still trying to process it when I heard footsteps on the stairs. My son was coming. And I had to decide what to do, with the box, with the papers, and with the truth I had just uncovered. Among all the documents, 3 caught my attention in a way I can only describe as magnetic. Life insurance policies. Each one large enough to change anyone's life completely. But the detail that froze my blood wasn't the amount. It was the beneficiary's name, Brian. And the signature in my place, carefully forged, almost elegant, wasn't mine. Before he reached the room, I quickly placed all the papers back in the box, pretending I hadn't seen any of it. His reaction when he saw that box in his son's hands told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just any secret. From that moment on, something inside me woke up. You know when you realize the world isn't as steady as you thought? That box, born out of a game, brought a strange, heavy silence into the house. Brian tried to brush it off, saying it was all old stuff, nothing important. But the tension in his eyes screamed otherwise. And that's when I stopped doubting the box, and started doubting the man I had trusted my entire life. I looked at those papers like they were death sentences. I had never seen them before, never had any conversation about insurance, let alone policies worth that much. And yet there they were, filed, documented, legitimate on the surface. The only logical and devastating conclusion was that my son had created the perfect setup to make my absence profitable. Not a loss but a gain. A dark investment. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just financial fraud. This was a death plan. Every printed line felt like a cruel reminder. To Brian, I was worth more dead than alive. The realization didn't come all at once. It seeped in like poison, slow and heavy. And deep down I knew, this was only the surface. Something far darker was hiding underneath. When I thought nothing else could shock me, my eyes caught something tucked deep in the box. Small, clear bottles, unlabeled, filled with white and yellow pills. At first glance, they looked identical to my daily medication, the ones I take religiously under my doctor's instructions. But the fact that they had no labels instantly put me on alert. It was like they were meant to be there, waiting, hoping I wouldn't ask questions. Suddenly, it all began to fit together in a way that made my stomach twist. For months, I'd been feeling strange dizziness, weakness, and a fatigue that made no sense. I had blamed it on age or stress. But looking at those bottles, I realized the cause might be something far more sinister. The possibility that I was being slowly poisoned was no longer something I could ignore. The thought seemed so absurd that for a moment I almost convinced myself it was paranoia. But how could I doubt it? Fake documents. Life insurance in my name. Now unlabeled pills. It was as if each piece of a monstrous puzzle was falling into place. And the worst part was knowing that every pill I had swallowed in the past few months could have been one more step toward the end, carefully planned. That night, while I was still trying to process everything, Tommy came to me with that innocent yet serious look only a worried child can have. He told me, as if sharing a fun secret, that his father often asked him to keep watch while he did grown-up stuff in the kitchen. To Tommy it was just a game, a special mission. To me it was like being punched in the stomach. The pieces started clicking together in my mind. I remembered all the nights Brian showed up unexpectedly, claiming he wanted to visit, always when I was resting. I remembered the strange smell from the kitchen, the clinking of bottles, the cups of tea he made for me without me asking. I had once seen these as acts of kindness. Now I saw them in a completely different light. The most painful part was realizing that Tommy, without knowing, might have given me the final piece of the puzzle. The secret game his father had invented wasn't a game at all. It was cover. Protection so he could act without being interrupted. And if I was right about those pills, then those late-night kitchen visits weren't innocent. They were rehearsals for a silent crime. I knew I needed proof before accusing my own son of something so monstrous. So one morning I went to the pharmacy and bought a home testing kit, the kind that detects chemical substances in medication. I cleared the kitchen table, set my regular pills beside the unlabeled ones, and opened the kit with trembling hands, feeling like an investigator on the brink of a life-changing discovery. When the drops reacted, the color that appeared made my breath stop. The test showed the presence of Digitalis, a medication used to treat serious heart problems but that, in the wrong dose, can cause fatal arrhythmias. I had never been prescribed it. I should never have taken even a milligram of it. It was like holding the smoking gun in my hands. No longer suspicion but cruel confirmation. What chilled me to the core was realizing how slow, how silent the method was, so that my decline would seem natural. The plan was so perfectly crafted that, if not for Tommy's innocent discovery and my decision to investigate, I might already have been at the final chapter of this story. But unlike what Brian expected, I now had more than doubt. I had evidence. That night, Tommy woke up crying from a nightmare. He said he dreamed about a pirate in a black hat who kidnapped a grandma and a boy, taking them to a ship where they would never see the ocean again. To him it was just a bad dream, one that faded with a tight hug. But to me it felt like his subconscious had translated our reality into images. The greedy, treacherous pirate was Brian, and the ship was the trap he was building for us. As I ran my fingers through my grandson's hair, I realized he was already carrying more weight than any child should. He was in the middle of a dirty game he didn't even understand. And yet he had been my warning sign, my little guardian. In that moment something inside me changed. The fear turned into resolve. This was no longer just about saving my own life. It was about making sure he grew up far away from this shadow. I promised myself, and silently promised him, that we would protect each other no matter the cost. And when I make a promise like that, it's not just a figure of speech. It means I'm willing to reinvent myself, to seek help, to map out strategies, to face even the things that terrify me the most. Because deep down I knew the battle was only just beginning, and that if we didn't move fast, the pirate from the dream could indeed catch us. When you discover that someone close to you is trying to destroy your life, the natural reaction might be shock or despair. I felt both. But I didn't stay still. I began to act like someone setting up a chess match. Every move had to be calculated, precise, impossible to predict. I spent sleepless nights researching attorneys who specialized in property crimes, private investigators with impeccable track records, and fraud experts capable of uncovering every single detail Brian had tried to hide. My desk became a war room. Folders, notes, phone numbers, and copies of every document I'd managed to find were organized by color and date. I called discreet professionals, explaining the situation in a way that left no doubt about the seriousness of it. I asked for guidance on preserving evidence, on how to act without raising suspicion, and I received advice that opened paths I never would have considered on my own. It was a counterattack, but a quiet one without fanfare. With every phone call, every scanned file, I could feel control slowly returning to my hands. If Brian wanted a war, he would get one, but not with screaming or scenes. This would be a war of strategy, patience, and precision. A battle where every step I took would be backed by the law and by truth. And I knew deep down the right moment for the first strike was getting closer, and he would never see it coming. I knew that to expose Brian, having proof wasn't enough. I needed to put him in a situation where he would expose himself. So I took a deep breath and called him, using a slow, trembling voice as if weakness was overtaking me. I told him I'd been feeling worse over the past few days and that I needed him to come take care of me. It was a painful role to play but necessary for the trap to work. While I waited for his response, I prepared everything. The lawyer was already aware of the visit, and the investigator discreetly installed cameras and microphones around the house. The tampered pills were separated and labeled for possible forensic testing. Even the cup he usually used to serve me tea was set out, clean, ready, and in plain sight. I left nothing to chance because I knew I'd only have one shot to get this right. He accepted without hesitation, confirming he would come that night. When I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread. This wasn't just about proving his guilt. It was about facing my own son in the moment when the game was finally over. And I knew that when he walked through that door, he wouldn't find the fragile mother he imagined, but someone ready to confront every lie he'd ever built. When Brian stepped through the door, he wore the perfect performance on his shoulders. Low voice, worried expression, steps calculated to show care. He set his keys down on the table and came in for a hug, but by then I no longer saw a son. I saw an actor who had rehearsed every gesture to deceive. I waited until he got comfortable, poured the tea he used to serve me, but this time I left my cup untouched. And then, looking straight into his eyes, I began the confrontation. I showed him copies of the insurance policies and the falsified adoption papers. There was no way he could deny them. The documents were right there, undeniable. He didn't try to make excuses. There wasn't even a stumble in his words. He just stayed silent for a few seconds as if calculating his next move. But when I mentioned the poisoning, I saw something different. A faint, almost imperceptible smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You've always been too smart for your own good," he said as if it were a compliment, but dripping with threat. That was the moment I realized. There was no mask anymore, no disguise. The man in front of me wasn't trying to hide. And in a way that made it even more dangerous, because it meant he was ready to play without shame or remorse. Tommy still thinks all of this was just some big misunderstanding between adults. He doesn't know that when he crawled under that bed and found that box, he saved not just my life, but his own as well. His childish curiosity, which in any other context might have earned him a scolding, was the thread that unraveled the entire rotten fabric that had been hidden. And to think, it all started with a simple game of hide and seek. Sometimes life has a strange way of showing you the truth. I had spent years believing that danger came from far away, from strangers or from dark places. But now I know it can sit at your table, smile at you, and even call itself family. It was a bitter lesson, but a necessary one. The kind of lesson that changes how you look at everything and everyone around you. What I know now is that Tommy will grow up safe. I'll make sure of it with every fiber of my being. He deserves a childhood where secret game means nothing but fun, not a disguise for something dangerous. And if it's up to me, he'll carry that curiosity with him into the world. But always in an environment where it means discovery, not survival. Nothing could have prepared me to hear those words coming out of my own son's mouth. My whole life I had tried to raise him with love, with values, with opportunities one never had myself. And even with all the mistakes any mother might make, I never imagined that one day he would plan to trade me for a sum of money. It wasn't just about documents, insurance, or pills. It was the coldness of someone who had already made the cruelest decision a human being can make. Brian looked me straight in the eye without hesitation and told me I had lived long enough. Those words cut deeper than any knife. It was as if my entire past, all those sleepless nights caring for him, all the stories I told to comfort him, had been erased. He spoke with the logic of someone solving a financial problem. Simple, direct, emotionless. As if my existence was nothing more than an obstacle to the life he wanted to live. And then came the final sentence, the one that still echoes in my mind. Life insurance would solve all my problems. There was no anger in his voice, only cold calculation. That was the moment I understood. I was no longer facing a lost son, but a man who no longer had a shred of the child I once loved. And that realization, as devastating as it was, gave me the clarity I needed to act fast. In that instant, as I tried to process the icy words coming out of Brian's mouth, it became clear that he didn't just want to get rid of me. He spoke of Tommy as if he were a disposable object, something that could be erased to make room for a real family. It was terrifying to think that a father, someone a little boy should trust completely, saw his own child as a burden to be eliminated. Hearing someone talk about their own child as if they were an inconvenience is one of the cruelest blows a mother can receive. The Brian I once knew and in some way still loved, was gone, replaced by a cold, distant stranger. He had severed himself from the very essence of what it means to be a parent, as if responsibility and love were just empty words in his vocabulary. And it shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. It was then that I realized the battle I was fighting wasn't just for me. It was for the innocence and future of my grandson. He needed protection, a safe harbor where he could grow without fear. And if Brian thought he could erase both a mother and a child, I knew my strength had to be greater than any act of destruction. I was ready to be that strength, for him and for Tommy. Brian thought I was defenseless, a weak victim he could manipulate at will. Little did he know that even before confronting him, I had tested the pills and confirmed my suspicions. With the police's help, I compiled a detailed report, packed with evidence that left no room for doubt. I was one step ahead, and that made all the difference in turning the game in my favor. When he realized I had reported him, the mask came off completely. The fury in his eyes was as intense as his cowardice. Behind that gaze was the desperation of a man watching his plan crumble, and the helplessness of someone who knew there was nowhere left to run. That reaction told me I was on the right path. The truth had power, and it was on my side. The most important thing in that moment wasn't just a personal victory. It was the safety I could finally secure for myself and for Tommy. Brian would no longer have control over our lives, and that changed everything. But I also knew the battle wasn't over yet, and that being ready for whatever came next would be essential to keeping the peace we had fought so hard to find. When Brian realized the police were on their way, his cowardly instinct took over. Without even looking back, he vanished into the darkness of the night, leaving behind not just the house but his own son, who slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the chaos around him. It was as if he had erased every responsibility and bond with a single step out the door. What lingered was a mixture of relief and deep sadness. Relief because, finally, he could no longer threaten us up close. Sadness because the man I had once known had become someone capable of abandoning even his own flesh and blood. 3 days passed, no sign of him, no words, no apology. Just an aching void where a father should have been. As the house grew quieter, I clung to the certainty that justice would do its part, that Brian couldn't run forever. It was time to rebuild, to care for Tommy, and to protect our future with everything I had. His escape wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, and I was ready to face it head-on. Tommy was still a child, but his sensitivity to what was happening around him was remarkable. At only 8 years old, he began to notice subtle changes in me. How my once weary eyes now looked steadier, and how my voice had regained its strength. He also noticed the strange silence in the house, the absence of his father in the mornings and nights that had once been routine. It was as if his child's instincts were picking up on what I was still trying to hide. He didn't know all the details, of course, nor could he understand the complexity of what had happened. But he felt the weight of the unspoken, the tension in the air and the space left behind by someone who had vanished without explanation. In his innocent questions, there was a mix of curiosity and fear, as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle that was still incomplete. That restlessness in him was a warning to me, a reminder that the trauma wasn't mine alone, but also his young, fragile soul's to bear. It was then I understood the urgency of protecting not just his body but his heart. I had to help him turn doubt into security, fear into hope. And that made me realize the greater challenge wasn't just dealing with the betrayal of the past, but building a future where he could grow up free and happy. The battle, I knew now, had a different meaning and a different protagonist. The days after Brian's escape were marked by constant tension, as if danger were lurking in every shadow. I found myself locking the doors twice before bed, checking the windows and glancing outside with my heart racing. The feeling was suffocating. At any moment he could appear again, and this time, there would be no surprise to save me. The worst part was knowing he was familiar with every detail of our routine. He knew exactly which path Tommy took to school, the times I left the house, and even the routes we avoided to stay safe. That knowledge made the threat feel even more real and terrifying. I felt like prey trying to outrun a relentless predator, always one step behind, trying to anticipate his moves. Yet despite the fear, something inside me was growing stronger. I couldn't allow panic to paralyze me or let Brian regain control, even from a distance. I had to turn that fear into vigilance, into active protection for my grandson and myself. And in that process, I discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going even when it's right there with you. It was close to midnight when the phone rang, slicing through the silence of the house like an unexpected thunderclap. On the other end, Brian spoke in a cold, threatening voice with no trace of regret. He wasn't calling to apologize, he was calling to make cruel demands. If I didn't drop the charges against him, something terrible would happen to Tommy. It was as if fear itself had found a voice, trying to crush us with the weight of intimidation. But in that moment, something inside me lit up in a way I hadn't expected. My voice, which had once trembled inside, came out firm and unshakable. There was no room for blackmail or fear in that conversation. I made it clear there was no turning back, that justice was the only way forward, and that I would protect my grandson at any cost. Maybe he expected weakness. Instead, he found a fortress he hadn't imagined was there. The call ended, but its impact burned inside me like a fresh scar. That threat showed me just how dangerous he truly was, willing to do anything to get what he wanted. And in that moment, I understood that my fight wasn't just against a treacherous son, but against an enemy who would stop at nothing to destroy what I loved most. Brian wasted no time delivering his ultimatum. Either I dropped the case against him or I'd face severe consequences. It was a cruel game, forcing me to choose between my own safety and the justice I knew we deserved. But something deep inside told me that giving in would only open the door for him to return, more dangerous and more brazen than before. Instead of retreating, I chose to act with intelligence. I spoke with Detective Brooks, who had become a key ally in this fight. Together, we came up with a plan to turn that sinister ultimatum into a trap for Brian. The idea was simple but powerful. Use his own threat to catch him in the act, securing undeniable evidence, and, above all, ensuring protection for Tommy and me. It was a moment where courage and strategy blended, where fear and determination merged into a new hope. I knew the road wouldn't be easy, but I also understood that the only way to guarantee our safety was to face danger head-on, with intelligence, patience, and above all, faith in justice. The battle was still on, but I was no longer fighting it alone. Choosing the park where Tommy played was a strategic move that struck Brian's ego more than he could have imagined. That place, just a playground for most people, to him represented an opportunity to intimidate me, to show he still had control. Little did he know that on that sunny afternoon he was about to walk into a carefully set trap, one that would dismantle his illusion of power in minutes. With the help of Detective Brooks and the police team, we set up an invisible web of safety around him. Undercover officers were scattered throughout the park, watching every move. As Brian approached, I felt the weight of the microphone hidden beneath my sweater, ready to capture every word, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. It was my silent weapon, my shield, and the final proof that justice was on my side. The plan wasn't just about catching Brian red-handed. It was about reclaiming control of our lives, ensuring he could no longer hide behind threats and manipulation. It was a declaration that, even in the places he thought he held power, I was stronger and more prepared than ever. And what happened next changed the course of the story forever. When Brian appeared in the park, his fury was impossible to hide. The man I had once known was long gone. Standing before me was someone unhinged, shouting that Tommy had never meant anything to him. His words were sharp as blades, making it clear his only interest was running away with the money he believed was his right. It was a tense moment, heavy with rage and hopelessness. But I didn't back down. Instead, I held my ground, steady as an anchor in the middle of a storm. In a calm but firm voice, I asked him to show the documents he kept demanding, knowing that in doing so he would reveal more than he intended. And that's exactly what happened. The mask slipped and Brian's true face, manipulative and utterly without scruples, was exposed for everyone to see. The moment he tried to snatch the papers from my hands, adrenaline surged through the park. But before he could finish his desperate move, undercover officers emerged from the trees, surrounding the area with swift precision. The scene, in the midst of families and children playing, felt like justice striking in broad daylight. Exactly what he deserved after everything he'd done. His arrest there, in the middle of the park's peaceful routine, was both symbolic and powerful. For the first time, Brian felt the real weight of his choices, not just in the officer's words but in the eyes of the people watching. It was the end of his game, the confirmation that the cruel, silent plan he had crafted would never have room to grow again. As he was led away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of relief and renewed strength. The fight had been brutal, but this victory proved that even the darkest paths can be lit by justice. And in that moment I knew Tommy and I could finally start to breathe again. As the cuffs tightened around his wrists, Brian threw me a venomous look and muttered, his voice dripping with threat, "This isn't over." For a moment time froze, and I felt the weight of that threat hang in the air, like a shadow trying to resist the light that had finally reached him. But inside me a different calm was taking hold, a certainty I had never felt before. In that silence I realized I had stopped waiting for a redemption that would never come. I had spent far too long pretending I could still save someone who didn't want to be saved. The battle was no longer against a son, but against the truth that he had chosen a path that would keep him away from me forever. And that acceptance was my liberation, the door that allowed me to move forward, free from the chains of the past. And so, as the police took him away, I stood firm, my heart heavy but resolute. Because despite his threat, I knew the darkest chapter of that story had closed. And at last, peace was on its way, for me, for Tommy, and for the life still ahead of us. With Brian finally behind bars, a different kind of silence settled over the house, one that carried the promise of better days. Slowly, our afternoons at the park stopped being moments of tension and became true moments of joy for me and Tommy. Thursday movie nights returned as our tradition, and Sunday pancakes tasted sweeter, filled with laughter and shared stories. This new routine was more than just habits. It was a daily rebuilding of what had almost been lost. Creating a safe, loving environment for Tommy became my number one mission. Every gesture, every word, every activity had one single purpose: to make sure he felt the love and protection he needed to grow healthy and happy. And in that calm I discovered the strength that comes from simplicity. Sometimes it's the smallest moments, a tight hug, a peaceful look, a light-hearted conversation, that restore what the storm nearly took away. But even in this new peace, I knew life would still bring its challenges, and that being ready for them was essential to protect the future we had fought so hard to build. One day Tommy surprised me with a simple question, heavy with pain. Would his father ever come back? I hesitated, wanting to protect his innocence, and answered firmly, no. To my surprise, he replied with a calm far beyond his 8 years. That's okay. He was never really here anyway. Those words broke my heart and, at the same time, filled me with an emotion only true love can awaken. The maturity in that little boy's response was something I never expected to hear so soon. It was the silent acceptance of a child who, despite his wounds, had chosen to move forward with courage and wisdom. For him, the emptiness his father left behind was already part of his story, and what truly mattered was what we were building together from that moment on. That answer made me realize that, even in chaos, children have an incredible capacity for adaptation and resilience, and that my mission was to strengthen that inner power in him, offering not just protection, but also an example of overcoming and unconditional love. It was a moment of mutual learning, where he taught me that sometimes, the deepest absence can be replaced by a presence that never fails. 3 months after his arrest, Brian stood in court and received the sentence he deserved: 12 years behind bars. That day, as I heard the verdict, I felt a mix of relief and justice served. It was confirmation that, despite all the pain and betrayal, the system could protect those who refused to give up on the truth. For me, it was the end of a dark chapter and the beginning of rebuilding. Along with the sentence, Brian gave up all parental rights to Tommy, a gesture that only reinforced how far he had drifted from what a father should be. For my grandson, that decision brought neither surprise nor sadness, because he had accepted that absence long before. An absence that for many might have been an unbearable void was, for him, just another turned page in a story he had already learned to live with. And for me, that sentence wasn't just punishment, it was a victory of life over fear and pain. It was the chance to create a future where the past was no longer a weight, but a lesson to build something better. And as we stepped into that new chapter, I knew that the love and safety I gave Tommy would be the strongest legacy I could leave. Today, when I look at Tommy, I see a boy who has grown with a strength and generosity that fill me with pride. He still asks me to tell him the story of the pirate treasure, the adventure that, in his mind, was the reason we survived. It's amazing how, through the innocent and pure eyes of a child, we are the heroes of a tale of courage and victory, and deep down he's not wrong. That story we created together has become more than just a memory. It's a symbol of resilience and hope. Tommy and I are the heroes of our own story, not because we defeated an enemy but because we chose to move forward despite the hardships. This strength, built on love and the daily fight to protect it, is what truly matters and what keeps us united. And it's this perspective I want to share with those who listen. Life can throw us into unimaginable situations, but within each of us lies a hero waiting to rise. Sometimes it's a child's courage that inspires us to keep going, and the true victory is keeping hope alive, even when everything seems lost. To this day, I've chosen not to tell Tommy the whole truth. I've preferred to protect his innocence and allow him to have a childhood free from the shadows of the past. I know this decision can spark debate, because it's never easy to decide what's best for those we love. After all, when the truth has the power to wound, protection can feel like the kinder path. But what about you? What would you do in my place? Do you believe preserving innocence is more important, or is complete honesty the better way? This is a question without a single right answer. Only a choice based on love and the unique circumstances of each family. I would truly like to hear your opinion, because your perspective might help others reflect on this same dilemma. And if you want to keep following real-life stories like this, stories that inspire, challenge, and move, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss a single story, and be part of this community that seeks strength and growth through real-life experiences.